You're listening to the People Agenda podcast, brought to you by leading HR, workforce and payroll transformation specialist, Lace Partners. Good morning, good afternoon and good evening and welcome to the latest People Agenda podcast. It's me, Chris Howard from Lace Partners, as always, joining you. Thank you very much for being here and being part of our wonderful People Agenda community. Today, it's an internal podcast. We have no external speakers. We have two absolute change experts. It's Annette Frem and it's Ed Sparks. Annette, how be thee today?
I am very good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's lovely to have you on. And Ed, Mr. Sparks, who leads our change practice, how are you, sir?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you, and just honoured to be in your presence again, Chris. I know that you've taken a lot of time recently to be a BBC sports pundit talking all things Arsenal, so coming back to your roots with this podcast must be a departure for you, but great to have you back and hope you're enjoying signing all the autographs.
I knew you'd do that. You even warned me beforehand, but you still don't be ready for it. If you want to find that out, you can check out my LinkedIn, but I won't go into too much detail on that because we're going to focus today on a blog that you guys wrote, which we actually wanted to bring to life with the spoken word as well, Ed, didn't we? So the blog is called When Change Feels Personal, Navigating Through Tough Times. We're going to put a link in the show notes to the actual blog itself so you can have a read of it. But it just brings up a couple of questions that I think are worth exploring that perhaps a 1,000-word blog doesn't quite always hit the note on. We're going to do something to accompany that. But before we do that, it probably is worth a bit of a framing and a positioning exercise, Ed, as to why we wrote this particular piece and then also why we're doing this podcast as well.
Yeah, no problem. And you're right. It's quite a serious topic today. And apologies, listeners, on your commute. This won't be as fun or chirpy as some of the podcasts, but a really important topic. And that's around this idea of change for tough times. So we as change managers love to deliver change that everybody is excited about. And there are some really fun and cool changes out there that we can do, deploying technology that people are screaming for, or AI that's making everybody's life easier and better. But we are also noticing a real trend within our clients at the moment around tough restructures, organizations, cuts, essentially, which we are having to change manage through. And that's an entirely different ballgame and is very emotionally draining on the people delivering that change and obviously the people receiving that change. And according to some recent research from the CIPD, it looks like about a third of employers at the moment in the UK are preparing to reduce headcount. So thinking about the right way to do that, knowing that you need to do that, but how do we do that in a respectful, empathetic way without getting bogged down in the legalities and while still delivering the really necessary hard change is the topic of today's blog and podcast. How do we actually deliver that on the ground?
Yeah. Annette, I want to get your view on this then. What are the kind of things that are influencing those changes? And Ed just mentioned a stat just then from the CIPD. What's driving all of this? Why is it happening now?
So I think there's a number of things that are happening at the moment. So one is, of course, the cost of rising employment just in general and definitely in the UK. We see a lot of AI and tech deployment that is making people rethink their structures and how they can do things in different ways. And then, of course, the whole global uncertainty. When we started thinking about this podcast was a couple of months ago. Since then, there's another war that we didn't see coming. So that's, of course, also. So unfortunately, a little bit of a perfect storm, it seems like.
Yeah, and Ed, I guess my counter to that would be, and I want to get your view on this, and then Annette, just jump in afterwards if you fancy just building on it. But it feels like basically since COVID, there's just stuff that always seems to be happening in the macroeconomic world. You've got pandemics, you've got wars, Iran, Ukraine, you've got challenges around general productivity within businesses, you've got the introduction of AI, as Annette mentioned. Change is just, it seems like it's BAU. Julian Holm in our business often talks about change is BAU, change is constant. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and look, I sound like a grumpy old man when I hark back to what feels...
Welcome to the club.
Yeah, it feels like it was slower change back in the day, right? Now, I remember pretty much the first blog or thing I ever put out there as a junior analyst in my career would have said something along the lines of change is happening quicker than ever before. It was true then. it's still true now, because I genuinely believe that the pace is increasing. You've just listed off there a mind-boggling array of things which are impacting us on a macro factor. But there's other elements to this as well. So if we take, for example, a typical tech cycle, it used to be that you would buy a new swanky piece of technology and you'd be sorted for the next 5 to 10 years before you had to do that again. 5 years from now, the tech that you're using will be flipping useless. All right. So moving quickly is really important, but that is carrying issues. And I think one thing that I'm observing in myself, in everybody around me, is the mental health aspect of that, which is important when it comes to change as well, right? So we are moving at this rapid pace. It is exhausting. It's scary. It's only looking like it's going to get quicker. People continue to use phrases like unprecedented and all these horrible words we used to hear during COVID as well. But I genuinely do believe that the pace is faster than it's ever been and is showing no signs of slowing down.
Yeah, Annette, I want to grab your view from this as well. And then I've got a supplementary question that you can answer, which is more around people that succeed in this new and rapidly transitioning world that we're talking about. Is it essentially about those people who have the right mindset to constantly evolve and be agile?
Yeah, I was just talking to Ed about, I think the silver lining with this change is more constant than we're used to this, and definitely since COVID, is that many organizations will have people who have been through some sort of change already. So it's not the first time. That's, of course, gives the challenge where people go, here we go again, in some instances. But I think from a personal level, I did thinking about when change feels personal, people will have tried this in one way or another. So I think that means that some people might not like it, but they do know some of the coping mechanisms. They do know what good life looks like. They have some of the tools that will help them kind of survive in the moment. So to your question, yes, I do think people who have the mindset and being curious are the ones that are surviving the situations better than others. But as I'm sure we'll come to, it's also about how the businesses are making people more change resilient and change ready when they go through these kind of things.
And we're noticing this in our own change managers as well. I lead a team of various change managers, and it is very clear to me which ones have personally been through a redundancy round or similar themselves. Their approach to it is different. They understand and empathize with that position. And we're seeing that come through now. And Annette, you've been across the full spectrum.
Yeah, no, exactly. I've been part of initiating it, deciding it, communicating it, been at the receiving end of it. I've been made redundant because of it, but also had new opportunities because of it. So yeah, I think having that personal experience of actually what does it actually mean, just take it from theory to actually make it really practical and put the guardrails in place and the activities in place that help people through it and make them more resistant.
And I guess there's what's bubbling around in my head here is around almost a ratio of people who have that experience within the business versus those people who don't. And I guess it can be quite scary it's a bit different. If you're an organization our size that are 100 odd people, then that balance is obviously important. But when you're talking about clients that we've worked with that are 5,000, 10,000 employees plus, the thing that pops into my head is if you've got 30, 40 people or 50 people that are experiencing this sort of before in a 100-person business, that's very different towards when you've got a global sort of shift that's happening. So how do leaders manage that from a larger scale perspective in terms of the ones that are left behind and making sure you're trying to keep it all together? What sort of advice can you give people listening into this?
So I'm going to try and avoid the standard advice that everybody can take for granted around treating people with respect, communicating in an honest manner. So let's take that as read. If I think about maybe the one piece of advice I'd be giving executive teams and CPOs right now, based on what I've seen and some of the projects I've been working on recently, involve your middle managers. It's amazing to me that executives and CPOs, they see this difficult thing coming. Some of them have only ever worked in companies during the good times, and they've ridden that company from we had 10 employees to 10,000 employees. It's a different ballgame for them. And they instantly take it upon themselves. They think to themselves, we're going through a very sensitive process. There are legalities involved here as well. I need to own and keep all of this to myself and only reveal what I can reveal when it's absolutely safe to do. And I'm not saying don't do that, and obviously stay legal and compliant and whatnot, but it is amazing the experience, and Annette made the point just now, that some of your middle managers can bring who maybe have been through this before. And even by sharing the problem with them, look, we know as a business we need to save X billion. We know that technology is disrupting. This is what our approach is as an executive team, but it's a challenge. What do you guys think as a middle management team? How can we best approach this too? And sharing that problem can actually lead to some better solutions in terms of your engagement outcomes, but also removes the primary risk, which is that then those middle managers turn around to their teams and say, here's the latest diktat from corporates. We're all screwed. I hate this as much as you do, guys. We're just going to have to do it and blame the chief exec. And actually, it turns it into a more inclusive exercise.
No, I think that's exactly it. It's so easy for the C-suite to be removed from the reality. The middle managers, they are the ones that are meeting people every day. They are going through the emotions with them. So I think it's that, how do you equip your middle managers to be the face of the change? And I think that's absolutely so critical, because it's so easy to be a bit removed, and definitely in the bigger organizations that we're working with.
What does that mean in practice, though, in terms of, so Ed, your words was involve your middle managers. At what sort of stage, how early should you be involving with them? Are we talking about get a small sort of almost steering cohort of key sort of voices within the business? Because I'm thinking about an organization that's 10,000 people, right? If you've got an organization that's 10,000 people, you've got probably hundreds of middle managers, right? Maybe even thousands. I guess if you're looking at that from okay, we've got to deliver some bad news and some change. If we involve all of these 1,000 middle managers, the downside or the possibility of communications leakage, I'll call it, coming out, and when things haven't fully been decided, that could be quite dangerous. But so I guess I just want some reflections from you on that. I guess my question is, what does that sort of mean? What could that look like, and how early do you share that? Are you having board level discussions about we've got to make some tough decisions? We're not talking about the next day saying an all middle management email going out saying, guys, we need you in the auditorium. We've got to have a chat, please, type stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the work starts before that. If we take a classic example, let's just say that your organization is running out of money. It's not selling whatever it sells as well as it was hoping to. Okay. Now you can take that example and you can say to yourself, the numbers are not looking great, but every time I do a town hall, I'm going to bang the positive drum and be like, it's suddenly, I know we're a little bit lower than before, but we're feeling great about this deal, that deal, and lay people's hopes and expectations on that, whilst employing a team in the back to sit in a dark room and think the scary thoughts. That's one way to go. But another way to go is to involve people throughout so that there is no surprise when the bad news genuinely comes. As a business, we're not doing as well as we were hoping to do. These are some of the things we need to do. So everybody go out there and see if you can reach out to your old contacts, all that sort of stuff up front at first. Brilliant. Okay. No, we're still not quite there, folks. All right. We are going to start having to think about making some savings in this and this area. I'm sorry that social is not going to be as fun as it was typically going to be, or things like that you can do. So people are starting to understand that we're tightening the belts. And then there might be another round where you just start to talk people through a sort of steadily escalating, if you like, series of measures that will be taken before anyone needs to talk about cuts. And that means that by the time you get to the point about talking about cuts, no one is surprised and everybody knows that you've exhausted some of the other options before you get there. And that means that when you are talking about cuts, your middle managers and others are aware of the case for change and everybody is on that same point. And at that point, you can say to your middle managers who've been involved throughout this, look, guys, it's still not working. We need to do more. I'm warning you now that there may have to be some more serious discussions and some more scary discussions. What's the best way to approach this? And actually ask them, how would you like to be kept up to date? How would you like to be engaged during this process as well? But this entire time, you have not just sat in a room and as an executive team, then come out with the killer announcement that makes it onto BBC News as being some horrific, you've got 2 weeks, clear your desk type situation. That's the thing that can be avoided.
No, 100%. And I think sometimes the top layer also misses that people are at the forefront. People are not seeing customers coming through the door. People are seeing that sales is going down. People know.
Yeah.
So actually, if you're not talking about it as a leadership team, that just makes you look like you're out of touch with what's going on. People know. So I think sometimes actually tell people what they know already, but they need to understand that, and you have a plan and you're thinking about what to do next. I think that's okay. The other thing about involving the middle managers is also, I think, that quite quickly you need to get them involved about thinking about what comes after this. So what will the world look like? Because people will go, okay, in some instances there's organization-wide cuts, but actually in some instances people are saying, but actually, do I now have to do 4 people's job instead of 3, or instead of 2, do I have to do my colleague's job?
Yeah.
So actually having that conversation around how do you make sure that we start thinking about, no, it's not us doing as we've done all along. We need to rethink how we're doing things and really get the managers involved in that conversation as soon as you can switch to that. Of course, you can't do that in the middle of everything, but I just think sometimes that what I see is missing from the plans around going through redundancies is that kind of what's next. It's not just ending when people leave.
Yeah, it's an emotional kind of undertaking that individuals have to go through. But the emotional undertaking often is, particularly if you see some of the stuff in the press. So you'll see big company X has to lay off 4,000 people, and your immediate thought are about those 4,000 people that are going to be exiting and their lives are changing and it's all horrible and all of that sort of stuff. We get it. But then a 10,000 person business still has 6,000 people left over. And so managing that, like you said, like the what comes next, I think is quite interesting. It's a challenging sort of experience for leaders. So let's focus, Ed, on that emotional side of it. What are the kind of, how do organizations or how do leadership and organizations prepare themselves or prepare for those people left behind in terms of the emotional readiness of the organization? Your job is going to change. How do you prepare those still within the business for that kind of the change during that tough time?
Yeah, it's really tricky. So the phrase is survivor's guilt, right? So the people who are left behind, they've gone through a bit of a process themselves. It's therefore really important that everybody has felt that the journey that, if you like, corporate has taken to this point has been a respectful and fair one. There are a few things that can disproportionately annoy people along the way. So an example of that would be if there's a sense that the leadership team is unaffected. Oh, that layer's fine, but they're just making whopping cuts to everybody else. That goes down like a lead balloon. There are various gaffes and things I've seen along the way which have been well-meaning but landed really badly. So, for example, a manager talking about the importance of well-being and then using an example about, I like to unwind of an evening by taking my horse out for a ride. That just doesn't land well. It's a nice, well-meaning thing.
I take my helicopter for a little spin.
Exactly. I think it's really important that. And then leaders in particular, this is tough, right? You have now heard various stories about how one member of your team has got a newborn baby, another member of the team's mother is sick, like all these personal situations which make you feel absolutely terrible about what is coming or what is landing. And that is not easy too. So that resilience coaching, leaders leaning on each other, it can be particularly lonely. As an example of this, often leaders are coached at this point, don't go out for drinks with your team, right? It's just not worth getting the alcohol involved at this point. You might say something that you regret. But then if you can't go out with your team, who can you talk to? So as a leadership team, going out together or sharing that experience and looking after each other is really important too. So maintaining that respectful tone, ensuring that there's an avenue that you can still talk to people throughout. And in general, having this feeling that this was very unfortunate. The company never wanted to do this, but they did it in a fair and transparent way is really important for that sort of longevity of feeling afterwards.
Annette, any kind of additions there?
Yeah, no, I think it's also just say it out loud. It is difficult. It is emotional. We are going through the range of emotions, and some of the best kind of companies in handling this and help them do that is actually when you start educating people in what's actually happening to you, what happened when you go through this change. So again, the Cooper change curve, again, it's one of my absolute favorites. I think as soon as people understand actually my emotions are going on a well-trodden path and there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I think just giving people tools to navigate and manage. So that's one of them. The other one is the transition models, Bridges transition model that kind of talks about the transitions you go through. And again, I think realizing that actually a lot of the time it's the non-tangible loss that actually is much harder for people to deal with than the actual loss of a job, the loss of the colleagues, the loss of the culture, the loss of your career aspirations, loss of you were part of something that's now going away. So I think that's another way organization can really help people going through it. It's just educate them a bit more about what's going on for you, and here's some tools for how you can navigate it.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that about the additional kind of intangible stuff. Every single business I've ever worked for, when somebody leaves the business, whether it's redundancy, whether it's they're a salesperson, they haven't hit their targets, and so they're naturally moving on from the organization, or even if they're just going somewhere else to be promoted, every single organization I've worked in, there's at least been one or two people that have said something along the lines, oh, you're going to miss it. And the first response is, I'll miss the people, because it's that human kind of connection that we all make that is so valuable and is such an important part of the change process. It's that kind of intangible, the emotive side of it. I want to talk a little bit around behaviors before we wrap up with some war stories about personal kind of reflections from you guys. But Ed, we've talked about involve your middle managers. We talked about the emotional feeling of those people that are left behind or those people that are then moving on. We've talked about the social economic drivers, but can you give us just some sort of thoughts before we go on to those personal stories or things that you can share? Obviously, we can't give specific client names, but the leadership behaviors that make the biggest kind of difference to tough transitions.
Yeah, I can. And hopefully, maybe I can cheer people up a little bit on their commute now with some of these. So let's start with a positive. People take pride even when they don't need to. So every single project I do that involves cuts, the risk comes up in the risk log around people are going to put down their pens or do a rubbish job from this point because they know that it's just not worth it. And I still have yet to see that. Sometimes people might resign a little bit early, but they still take pride in their work and want to hand over and do things in a good way. So that's one thing I think I'm really proud and pleased to see as we go through. In terms of leadership behaviors, I think people need to see that you are doing your best in a tough situation. If you cannot answer a question for various legal or whatever reasons, that's fine. People will understand that. You don't need to overshare. And I am an oversharer by nature, so I get coached out of this all of the time. You don't need to, but they need to understand the journey that you are going through. Look, guys, I can't share that right now. Hopefully in a couple of weeks, the situation will be a little bit clearer, but that's what I'm not deliberately hiding something here. We're not allowed to, we're not in a position to there as well. You touched, Chris, before on the sort of period of uncertainty, and that is a big debate, right? So you can fire the starting pistol and say, guys, we're going to make cuts. It's going to be roughly this big, and we'll be in touch soon in terms of whether you're at risk or not. You need to be careful when you fire that starting pistol because there will be uncertainty and worry from that point. But there are, like I said before, foundations and groundwork that can be laid as you go. So if you feel that your leader has tried everything else before we've reached this point, is going to be as open and honest with you as possible, then you will continue to do a good job to the best of your ability, up to, including, and beyond any bad news you might receive about your own job, is the observation I've got.
Yeah.
And I think stand by your decision, because I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of projects. It's like when it gets really tough, when the uncomfortable conversation starts to happen, we do sometimes see that the leadership team are wobbling, and there might be, or maybe I don't need to cut that many heads anyway, or maybe we could do this with that role if we move things around. And I think it's just so important to stand by with what you said. Of course, during consultations, whether that's bigger ones or the individual ones, be open for suggestions and changes. And again, I think the businesses that can show that they're taking some feedback on, some ideas on, stand stronger in the bigger process. But I think don't look like you're wobbling, because then the distrust to what's going on is too big and can become quite unmanageable. I might have alluded to one of my personal kind of good, bad, and ugly.
Let's segue into that. You can kick us off then, Annette, and then Ed, you can share one because we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. So you can pick just either a good, a bad, or an ugly scenario in which, in your time related to organisational change. And as I mentioned, obviously we can't name organisations, but give us a war story or a positive. What's the opposite? A peace story? I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's actually on the bit about an organisation I know of. I don't want to say any more of that, but actually a massive reorganisation was announced. And it's quite significant. It was really changing how the business was doing business. And then the CEO resigned within days of making that announcement. And I guess we could all agree that's very unfortunate. And back to my point about you need to own it, you need to lead it, you need to believe in where you're taking your organization. So if the person coming out with a new way of kind of structure and working is then seen to actually, that's all fine, but I'm not going to be here to see the kind of repercussion of what we're doing and live that through, that just very unfortunate and something that needs to be heavily managed, as you can imagine. And there's lots of reasons for why it happened. But again, I think we can agree that's probably not the best turn of events.
Yeah, that's a war story, Ed.
Yeah, so I've given you my ugly one, which was the horse riding thing. And there's a few sort of examples of gaffes like that. So let me give you a good and positive one. I'm mindful that on this podcast, we have a lot of CPOs listening, and no CPO wants to be making cuts, right? That what they want to be doing is getting on stage at some big forum and talking about how they've taken the company from 2 people to 10,000 people, and it's all been absolutely fantastic and riding the wave. But in many ways, this difficult bit here is where the CPO role really comes into importance. But that doesn't mean it's easy. And I have spoken to CPOs before who feel physically sick just before they need to make some of these announcements. And so my nice story is there are moments where ordinary employees can go up to that CPO and say, I know what you're doing is difficult, and I really appreciate the effort that you're making. And these little micro speeches, interventions, conversations are so much more meaningful than people realize when people are in that sort of position. So looking out for each other and recognizing the frankly horrible role that some people have to play going forward can really help to inject, in general, a culture of supportiveness across the business.
It's a really nice kind of bookend to what is it's interesting, not always in the most positive. This is still an interesting topic. It might not always be one that is enveloped in extreme positivity, but it is important to talk about this stuff. I'm really glad that we did talk about this stuff. Interestingly enough, by the time we actually release this podcast, we will have released a white paper, which is talking around business restructuring and the practical sides of making it work. So if you want to check that out, we'll put that into the show notes as well. You can visit the Lace Partners website, and if you go onto the insights section, and there's a tab there which has you click the white paper button, and then you can actually download that latest white paper if you want to get a little bit more information and some tips and guidance that we put on as well. Annette, you would like to say a final thing?
Yeah, it's just because I want to do a little shout out for the When Change Feels personal blog that you said you would put in the show notes. There's also a little questionnaire. So if anybody been inspired to check how ready they feel for managing change when it feels personal, then a quick little questionnaire, and you can take that and then come up with your change profile and how ready you are, and with some little guidance. Just a little promotion of that.
Excellent. So lots of resource, lots of assets for you to have a look at. Hopefully you found this podcast useful. And if you do want to reach out to any of the guys, you can do so via LinkedIn or on the Lace website via the Contact Us page. And we'd be more than happy to talk to you about some of the challenges that you're facing. Ed, thank you very much.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Never a chore. Annette, lovely to see you again.
And likewise, really enjoyed this.
I really enjoyed it, and hopefully those of you that have been listening in have enjoyed receiving some of the interesting information, as I said, but from myself, from Ed, and from Annette. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the People Agenda podcast. Bye-bye.